I opened my eyes to the harsh white light of the hospital ceiling. My ribs felt like they'd been crushed in a vice. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. I was trying to remember where I was, how I got here. When the door opened, Eric stepped inside first, wearing an expensive blazer I'd never seen before. His hair slicked back like he was auditioning for a role he didn't deserve. And right behind him was a woman, young, elegant, in a fitted black dress. She stopped dead in the doorway, staring at me as if she'd just seen a ghost. Then she screamed, "Oh my God, she's my mother!" The words cut through me, harder than the crash ever could. I froze, my mind scrambling for something, anything, that could make sense of what I'd just heard. But before I could speak, Eric's hand clamped around her arm. "Vanessa," he hissed, his voice tight. "Stick to the plan." "Plan? What plan?" I didn't say a word. I just looked at her. Really looked. Her eyes, my eyes, the same shape, the same deep hazel color. My breath caught in my throat. No, that's impossible. 2 days ago, or was it 3? I'd been driving home with a brand new watch on the passenger seat, picturing Eric's face when I told him the news. $11 million. That's what my Uncle James had left me. More money than I'd ever imagined having. Enough to wipe away our debts, buy a house, give Eric the freedom to chase his art without worrying about rent. I never made it home. 1 second, I was on the highway. The next, I was spinning, metal screaming against metal. A semi's headlights flooding my vision. Then, nothing. Darkness. When I woke up here, Eric wasn't there. Not the first night. Not the second. Not at all. Until now. And now, when he finally shows up, it's with a woman who just called me her mother. Eric tried to recover, forcing a thin smile. "Honey, you've been through a lot. Your memory might be..." "Don't..." I cut him off. My voice was low, but it carried weight I hadn't felt in a long time. "Don't you dare gaslight me right now." Vanessa's gaze didn't leave mine. Her lips trembled. I could feel the pull of some deep, unspoken truth between us, like a thread that had been buried for years, suddenly yanked into the open. And in that moment, the pain in my body took a back seat to something bigger, darker, because whatever had happened in that crash, whatever had happened while I lay here, broken and alone, it was clear now. Eric was hiding something. And this woman, the one who looked at me like she'd been waiting her whole life, was the key to unlocking it. I didn't know it yet, but the wreck that nearly killed me was about to expose a betrayal so calculated, so personal, that it would change the course of my life forever. When I was a kid, the name James Wallace carried weight in our small town. People spoke it with a mix of respect and envy. He was my father's older brother, but you wouldn't have guessed we were family from the way they acted around each other. They hadn't spoken in decades, ever since some bitter fallout over the family business. I was too young to understand it, but I knew the silence between them was deliberate, the kind that hangs in the air like heavy smoke. Still, every now and then, for reasons no one ever explained, I'd get to visit Uncle James's countryside estate. It was nothing short of magical to me, a sprawling Victorian home surrounded by rolling fields, with a library that smelled like leather and dust, filled floor to ceiling with books I wasn't allowed to touch unless he handed them to me himself. He'd tell me stories, some about business, some about places he'd traveled, and some, I'm convinced, that he completely made up just to see my reaction. He was a self-made man. Real estate development. That's how he built his empire. No wife, no kids, no distractions. At least, not the kind most people have. He threw himself into work with the kind of obsession I'd only come to recognize later in life. I remember thinking he seemed lonely sometimes, but I never dared ask. I didn't know until much later that he'd been quietly keeping tabs on me over the years. Birthday cards, letters with little notes about his life, and subtle questions about mine. I'd answer politely, but I never knew what to say. There was always that invisible wall between our families. Then, about 6 months before my accident, I heard he was in the hospital with advanced heart disease. Something in me shifted. I drove out to see him, half expecting it to be awkward, maybe even unwanted. But when I walked into that sterile room, his eyes lit up in a way I'll never forget. "Morgan," he said, in a voice that had lost its power, but not its warmth, "I always knew you'd come back." That visit turned into weekly ones. We talked about everything: politics, philosophy, the books he loved most. We never mentioned my father or the feud. It was like we had silently agreed to start fresh. And then, just 3 months later, he was gone, peacefully, in his sleep. I thought I'd mourn him quietly and move on. But the call from his attorney, Benjamin Harrison, changed everything. I walked into that office expecting a keepsake, maybe an old photograph. Instead, Benjamin slid a document across his desk. Uncle James's will. He'd left me everything: the estate, his investments, $11 million in total. I just sat there, staring, my mind blank. Benjamin explained that James had revised his will after we reconnected. "He admired that you built your life on your own terms," he said. Attached was a letter in Uncle James's handwriting. I can still hear his voice in the words, "This money is a tool, not a solution. Use it well, be happy, and remember that true wealth isn't measured in dollars." I left the office that day in a daze, clutching that letter like it was made of glass. My first thought was Eric, how I couldn't wait to tell him that all our struggles were over. If only I had known that the moment Uncle James's pen signed my name into that will, it had also signed my life into a storm I never saw coming. The sky that afternoon was the kind of gray that makes the world feel heavier. I left Benjamin's office with the letter from Uncle James folded carefully in my purse, a brand new watch in a little velvet box on the seat beside me. I'd stopped at a jewelry store on a whim, picturing the look on Eric's face when I told him everything, how his shoulders would finally relax, how he'd maybe laugh for the first time in months. We were about to be free. I called him from the car. "I'm coming home early. I've got incredible news." His voice was distracted, clipped. "I'm in the middle of something. New art project. Experimental. This is important, Eric. I'll be there in 30 minutes. "Fine. Just don't expect much reaction. I'm in my creative zone." That stung, but I brushed it off. Once he heard, he'd understand. The rain started as a light drizzle, dotting the windshield, making the road shine under the fading sun. I turned on the radio. Some upbeat song that didn't match the weight in my chest. I was rehearsing the moment in my head. I'd hand him the box, tell him to open it, watch his confusion turn to joy when I explained. Then I saw it. A semi, 2 lanes over, swerving hard, its tires screaming against wet asphalt. The trailer jackknifed in an instant, swinging across the road like a pendulum made of steel. I gripped the wheel and swerved right, but there was nowhere to go. The sound was deafening, metal crushing metal, glass exploding. My car spun so violently that the world outside became a blur of headlights and shadows. The watch box flew open. I remember seeing the watch slide across the dashboard in slow motion, like some cruel metaphor for everything I was about to lose. My head slammed forward. The airbag punched the breath out of me. And then, nothing. When I woke, it was to the sterile smell of antiseptic and the steady beep of machines. Pain radiated through my body with every breath. My first thought was Eric. He'd be here. He had to be here. But he wasn't. Hours passed, then days. Nurses told me they'd called my emergency contact, left messages, but no one came. I tried calling him myself, straight to voicemail. Texts went unanswered. On the fourth day, I finally got a reply. Heard about accident. Really busy with breakthrough project. Will visit when things calm down. No. Are you okay? No. I'm on my way. Just nothing. That was when Sarah, my nurse, leaned in and said what I'd been avoiding. That's not normal, Morgan. Something's wrong. I wanted to believe she was wrong. I wanted to believe the man I'd loved for 7 years was just overwhelmed or scared. But by the end of the week, when I scrolled through social media on Sarah's tablet, the truth hit me like that truck all over again. There he was, Eric, checked in at an exclusive art club, champagne in hand, with the caption, "Celebrating New Beginnings." And standing beside him, smiling like they owned the world, was a young woman with dark hair and eyes that felt unsettlingly familiar. I didn't know it yet, but the crash hadn't been the worst part of my week. That photo was the true impact. The moment I realized I wasn't just fighting to heal my body. I was about to uncover a betrayal so calculated it would make the wreck feel like mercy. I stared at that photo until the screen dimmed. My thumb hovered over it, as if touching their faces could somehow change what I was seeing. Eric, dressed like success, had finally found him, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. And that woman, mid-20s, dark hair, cheekbones that seemed carved from a memory I couldn't quite place, tucked against him, like they'd been a couple forever. Sarah leaned over my shoulder. "Who's she?" "I don't know," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, something in my gut whispered, "You do." I called Melanie, my closest friend, the one person who would give me the truth. Her voice was jittery, almost guilty. "I can't come right now, Morgan. Things are complicated." "Complicated how?" "It's not my place." "Melanie, tell me." Silence. Then softly, "He's been telling people you didn't make it, that you died in the crash." I felt my heart physically lurch. "What? There was even some kind of memorial thing at your apartment. I couldn't go." "And that woman, her name's Vanessa. They've been together. Morgan, they got married last weekend." Married. My husband had declared me dead and married someone else within days. I could hear my own breathing in my ears. Too loud, too fast. Melanie's voice wavered. "There's more. People keep saying she looks like you. Like, really looks like you. Just younger." The words sank like a stone into my chest. That eerie familiarity in her face wasn't my imagination. It was something else. Something that made my skin prickle. I gripped the phone harder. "I need to see her. Show me." A pause. Then Melanie texted me a link to Vanessa's Instagram. I opened it, scrolling through polished photos of gallery events and wine tastings. Every image was a quiet gut punch. Her smile, the tilt of her head, even the way she carried herself. It was like looking at a living echo of my younger self. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept hearing Sarah's earlier warning. "That's not normal, Morgan. Something's wrong." Wrong didn't even begin to cover it. The next morning, I called Benjamin, my uncle's attorney. "He's trying to get to the inheritance, isn't he?" Benjamin's voice was grim. "More than that. He came to my office with this woman, claiming you'd died, bringing forged documents, marriage certificates, death certificates. He said she was your sister and had a right to part of the estate. I don't have a sister, I said, the words tasting bitter. I know. That's why I stalled them. But they'll try again. It was like standing on a cliff edge, the wind threatening to push me over. I couldn't piece it all together yet, but every instinct told me this wasn't just greed. This was personal. By the time I hung up, my mind was already moving ahead. If they thought I was too broken, too confused to fight back, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The knock came at exactly 2 o'clock. My pulse spiked, the heart monitor betraying what I tried to keep off my face. Sarah gave my hand a quick squeeze before stepping back toward the bathroom door, where she'd have a full view without being in the way. Benjamin was already in the chair by the window, his briefcase resting on his lap, his presence calm but charged, like a coiled spring. Eric walked in first. Not the Eric I married, the one who wore paint-smeared jeans and a tired grin, but someone sleeker, sharper. His hair was styled, his suit tailored, and on his wrist was a watch that screamed money. Behind him came Vanessa. She hung back at first, half hidden in the doorway, like she wasn't sure she belonged in the room. When she finally stepped forward, my breath caught. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. Same eyes, same bone structure. It was like staring into a mirror set 17 years in the past. Eric's tone was syrupy, rehearsed. "Morgan, you're awake. We've been so worried." "We?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. He gestured toward Vanessa. "You remember, don't you? Your cousin's daughter." I said nothing, just watched him move closer, papers in hand. "The doctors say you might not be up for handling certain responsibilities. I've brought some simple forms. Just a signature, and I can take care of everything while you recover." I tilted my head. "You mean the $11 million? His smile flickered. "Of course. Such a blessing, but also a burden. Stress isn't good for you right now. And blocking my social media? Changing the locks on our apartment? Telling people I was dead?" His jaw tightened. "You're confused. Medication does that." Benjamin's voice cut through the air. "Show her the video." Eric spun around, startled. "Who the hell are you?" "Morgan's attorney," Benjamin said, standing and setting a tablet on my bed tray. The footage rolled. Eric and Vanessa in Benjamin's office, presenting forged death certificates and claiming inheritance rights. Eric's mask cracked. "Enough. Turn that off. Hospital security is outside," Sarah said sharply. Vanessa shifted, stepping closer. Her eyes met mine, and something in her face changed. Confusion, recognition, fear all at once. Her lips parted. "Oh my God, you're my mother." The room went still. Eric lunged toward her. "Shut up. Stick to the plan." But she didn't move. Her hand shook as she reached into her purse, pulling out a worn photograph. One I knew instantly. Me at 18, holding a newborn, eyes red from crying. A picture I thought had been destroyed years ago. "I've been looking for you my whole life," Vanessa whispered. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Every cell in my body was vibrating with the collision of past and present. I realized then that the betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about my life, my history, the one thing I never thought I'd get back. And Eric, he'd tried to weaponize it against me. For a long moment, no one breathed. Vanessa stood frozen beside my bed, clutching that photo like it was the only solid thing in the room. I felt the weight of 17 years pressing against my ribs. But before I could speak, Benjamin's voice cut through. "Miss Laurent," he said gently, "how exactly did you meet Mr. Wallace?" Vanessa's gaze flicked to Eric, then back to me. Her voice was unsteady. "I didn't find him. He found me. About 3 months ago at the gallery where I work. She swallowed hard. He said he knew my birth mother, that she was wealthy, but afraid of rejection, that she wanted to reconnect, but didn't know how. My stomach dropped. 3 months ago. That was when I'd been spending weekends at Uncle James's hospital bedside, completely unaware that Eric was building a new life in the shadows. I looked at him. The memory box. You found it when we moved last year. His silence was all the confirmation I needed. Inside that box had been my hospital bracelet, a tiny knitted cap, and that photograph. I'd hidden it away, thinking I'd buried that chapter forever. But Eric, he'd opened it, studied it, and seen not a piece of my past, but a tool for his future. Benjamin's tone hardened. So, the plan was to marry Morgan's daughter, after declaring Morgan dead, so the entire inheritance would stay in the family. Correct. Vanessa's eyes widened. What? Eric's face twisted. Half the money would have gone to her anyway. Once it came out, you two were related. I was just expediting the process. By forging death certificates, lying to a court, and committing bigamy, Benjamin said, every word sharp as glass. Not to mention potential conspiracy if we prove you left Morgan without medical aid after the crash. Vanessa stepped back, shaking her head like she could dislodge the last 3 months from her memory. You used me, she whispered. Every conversation, every promise. You were just setting up your payday. Eric's patience snapped. Don't be naive. You wanted to find your birth mother. I helped. The money was just a bonus. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time saw the truth, without the fog of love or history. You never loved me, I said quietly. I was just convenient, a steady income, until you could trade me in for a bigger prize. His mouth curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Love doesn't pay the bills. Benjamin closed his briefcase with a decisive snap. Security. 2 uniformed officers stepped into the doorway. Eric's bravado flickered into something feral, like a trapped animal. You can't prove anything, he said, his voice rising. We have enough to start, Benjamin replied, nodding toward the tablet still on my tray. And we're just getting warmed up. As the officers moved in, Eric threw one last look at me, half plea, half venom. Morgan, think about what we've been through. We can fix this. I held his gaze, my voice steady. We're way past fixing. All that's left is the truth, and you can't talk your way out of that. They took him by the arms. Vanessa turned away, her shoulders trembling. I reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull back. For the first time since the crash, I felt the tide shift. Eric's game was over, but what came next, for me and for Vanessa, was a story we'd have to write together. The hallway echoed with the sound of Eric's protests as security led him away. His voice faded, but the tension he left behind clung to the air like smoke after a fire. Vanessa and I sat in silence, her hand still in mine, both of us trying to process how a man we'd each trusted in our own way had been playing us against each other. Benjamin stayed a moment longer. Morgan, there's one more thing you should know. Detective Jennings asked me to tell you they found something at your apartment. My grip tightened on the blanket. What did they find? He glanced toward the door, then back at me. A bottle of prescription sedatives, filled 3 days before your crash. Under your name. I've never needed sleeping pills, I said immediately. That's why they're testing the contents. Neighbors reported you seemed disoriented in the days before the accident. If the tests confirm it, we could be looking at attempted murder charges. The words hung there, heavy and electric. Eric hadn't just abandoned me. He might have been trying to erase me entirely. The thought made my skin crawl. Vanessa's jaw set, He's not getting away with any of this. Benjamin gave a curt nod. The DA is moving fast. Fraud, forgery, bigamy, attempted grand theft, now potentially conspiracy to commit murder. He's facing years, maybe decades behind bars. I leaned back against the pillows, feeling a strange mix of relief and grief. Relief that the law was closing in. Grief for the years I'd wasted believing in a man who saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of police interviews, legal meetings, and tentative conversations with Vanessa. We were strangers, tied by blood, and a mess of tangled history, learning how to speak to each other without the shadow of Eric looming over us. One evening, she arrived with takeout and a shy smile. I've been thinking about quitting the gallery. Too many memories of him there. What will you do instead? I asked. She hesitated. Go back to school. Study psychology. Maybe work with adoptees and birth parents. Help people navigate reunions without all this. She gestured vaguely, but we both knew she meant the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. It hit me then. Eric hadn't destroyed her hope. If anything, she was taking the shards of what he'd done and building something new. A week later, Detective Jennings came to my hospital room herself. The lab confirmed it, she said, her voice steady, but her eyes sharp. Those pills were laced, enough to keep you sedated for days, if you'd taken them. Vanessa's hand found mine under the blanket. Jennings continued. We can't prove he caused the crash, but we can prove intent to harm you. That strengthens every other charge. For the first time since I'd woken up in that hospital bed, I felt a surge of certainty. Not just that Eric's downfall was inevitable, but that my survival had been more than luck. By the time they wheeled me out for discharge, the media was already circling the case. I ignored the headlines, the speculation, the flashes of cameras. My focus was on the woman walking beside me, steadying my bag on her shoulder. The estate was waiting. A new chapter was waiting. And for the first time in a long time, I wanted to turn the page. The ride to Uncle James's estate was quiet, but it wasn't the kind of silence that pressed on your chest. It was the kind that made space. Space to breathe, to think, to let the road ahead mean something more than just miles. Vanessa drove, her hands steady on the wheel, her eyes fixed on the winding stretch of asphalt that would take us out of the city. I sat back, watching the skyline shrink into the horizon, the weight of the last few weeks settling into something that finally felt like closure. Snow had fallen the night before, leaving a fine white powder on the fields. It made everything look untouched, like the past hadn't yet caught up here. The estate appeared in the distance, its wraparound porch and tall windows standing exactly as I remembered from childhood, though the years had added a certain gravitas. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement. Benjamin had arranged for ramps to be installed alongside the front steps, a temporary first-floor bedroom set up in what used to be Uncle James's study, grab bars in the bathrooms, all practical changes. But the sight of them felt like a promise. You belong here now. Vanessa parked near the front entrance and turned to me. Ready? I smiled, though it felt tentative, as I'll ever be. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and old books, light filtered through the tall windows, spilling across the polished hardwood floors. It was a strange sensation, walking into a place from my childhood and knowing it was mine now, not just to visit, but to live in, to make new memories in. The first few days were an adjustment. We circled each other, like two people learning a dance, figuring out the steps as we went. Vanessa was a morning person who sang in the shower. I preferred silence until my second cup of coffee. She liked her music loud while she cooked. I liked mine soft and tucked into the background. Little things. But in those little things, we began to find a rhythm. Physical therapy sessions were grueling. The pain was always there, a dull reminder of what I'd survived. But each milestone, a few steps with a cane, a longer stretch without needing to sit, felt like a victory. Vanessa celebrated them with cupcakes from the local bakery, an unspoken ritual we both came to rely on. Emotionally, the healing was trickier. Dr. Jessica continued our therapy sessions over video calls, helping me navigate not just the betrayal, but the sudden shift into motherhood after nearly 2 decades. Relationships built under crisis can be intense but fragile, she warned. Give yourselves time to build something sustainable. We took her advice seriously. Sunday movie nights, Thursday cooking experiments, walks around the property as my mobility improved. We started filling the 17-year gap with pieces of ourselves, stories from her childhood, moments from my life before her, things we'd never thought we'd share with anyone. About a month after we moved in, Vanessa hesitantly asked if I'd like to meet her adoptive parents. They've always spoken about you with respect, she said. They want to meet you when you're ready. I was nervous, terrified, really. Would they see me as an intruder? Would they resent me for reappearing now? But when they arrived, all that fear dissolved. Mark and Diana Laurent were warm, grounded people who greeted me with hugs, not handshakes. Over tea, Diana said, "We've always considered ourselves custodians until you could be part of her life again. We're so glad that day has come, even under difficult circumstances." Their generosity humbled me. They didn't see me as a threat, but as an addition to the family. By the time they left, we'd made plans for holidays and weekend visits. The legal proceedings against Eric continued in the background. I attended hearings when I had to, each time facing him across the courtroom. The man who once oozed charm now sat sullen in an orange jumpsuit, his eyes hollow. When the judge sentenced him to 8 years for fraud, forgery, bigamy, and conspiracy, I didn't feel triumph, just a quiet relief that he couldn't hurt anyone else for a long time. "Do you still love him?" Vanessa asked me one evening after a particularly long day in court. "No," I said without hesitation. "I mourn the person I thought he was, but that person never existed. He was a character Eric created, like one of his paintings." Spring came, and with it, the urge to reclaim the estate's neglected gardens. Vanessa and I spent weekends planting flowers and vegetables, watching the bare soil come alive again. It felt symbolic, turning something overgrown and abandoned into something vibrant and ours. Following Benjamin's guidance, I set up a charitable foundation in Uncle James's name, focused on supporting single mothers and ethical adoption practices. It felt right, transforming the inheritance that had nearly destroyed me into something that could help others avoid my kind of pain. Vanessa started classes at the university that fall, diving into psychology with an enthusiasm that made me proud. She was building her own future now, one no one could manipulate. As for me, I started writing. At first, it was just for myself, a way to untangle the knots in my head. But soon it took shape as a novel, fictionalized, yes, but anchored in truth. Every word felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. 1 year after the crash, we hosted a small gathering at the estate. Sarah came, as did Benjamin, Detective Jennings, Dr. Jessica, Melanie, and Vanessa's parents. We stood together in the same room, the people who had helped carry me through my darkest days. When it was time, I raised my glass. To unexpected journeys and the people who help us navigate them. Later, as the night wound down and the guests trickled out, Vanessa and I sat on the porch steps under a clear sky scattered with stars. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Not the adoption, but everything after. The accident, finding out about Eric, all of it. I thought about it. Regret means I'd choose differently if I could. But if changing the past meant I'd never find you again, then no, I wouldn't change a thing." She smiled softly. "You know, you're a lot stronger than you think." I looked out at the garden, now green and full under the moonlight. Sometimes you have to survive a crash to find your way home. So I'll ask you, yes, you listening to this, have you ever had your life torn apart in a way that seemed unbearable, only to realize later it led you somewhere better? Sometimes betrayal clears the path for something far more precious. And sometimes the family you end up with isn't the one you expected. It's the one that chooses to stand by you when everything else falls away. That's what I found. That's what I kept. And that's why I can finally say, I'm home.